Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another capitalistic episode of The Gold Standard with Alan Mosley. And here's your host, Alan Mosley.
Guys, welcome back to another episode of The Gold Standard. I am your host, Alan Mosley. This is episode 49.
49.
The big 5-0 is next week.
Oh, here we go.
And we have something cool for
yes,
that.
Yes, we do.
We have
sure
something
do.
cool for that. And people who know us actually already know what it is, so it's not really a big surprise. But next week, that's all I'm going to say.
Yeah.
Next week.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But this is a good show, too.
But this is a great show.
This is a great show.
We're on a good, we're batting 1,000 over the last few weeks. It's been a series of good episodes.
Yes, it has.
Yeah. You know what? I'm actually going to go ahead and say we haven't had a bad episode since
the last time I was on it with you.
Since the last one. Since the last one, we haven't had a bad one. That's right. No, don't do that.
Yeah,
Come on.
Okay. To be fair, yeah.
So, guys, if you want to follow me on social media, it's facebook.com/TGS Alan Mosley. My Twitter is @AlanMMosley. That's ALAN, by the way, which it runs down there like it always does.
Yeah.
I don't know
you
why
should be
I'm
able to see
saying
it right there on the
it's
bottom.
right.
Yeah.
People who are listening don't see it.
Right.
But people who are watching the video, there it is right there.
Right.
But you don't have to do any of that.
No, you don't.
Because you can just go to our website, which is thegoldstandardpodcast.com.
That's right.
You know what else you can do there?
What?
You can go there and you can click on the donate link at the top and give us money.
And why would someone want to do that, Alan?
Really, at this point, why wouldn't they? I mean, really, though.
True.
Yeah.
True. Also, if they see us on social media, they should share with all their friends on their page.
Yeah, you should like and share our
That's
posts
right.
and our episodes.
Please do.
We appreciate our fans who help get the show out there. For people, I mean, you know how tough it is to navigate social media and throttling and all that business. But but people sharing the show, we do appreciate it a lot. I'll tell you why you should donate to the program. Because we have such awesome guests.
We do.
And we do such awesome segments on the show.
Yes,
and it allows us more time to produce more content like that if we have more money.
Yeah.
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 That's it.
That's it.
That's we don't just take the money and go to get hookers and blow. I mean,
no, you do that. I
mean, we do that, but we don't. But that's expensive, and now we've run out of our show budget, and so we need our show budget back, and so that's why we need donations. There you go.
Yeah,
Blake over there is like, I don't know what
you don't have to explain anything to me.
Yeah.
You know?
yeah. You don't have to tell me that. I know. So let me tell you what I will explain though.
Go ahead.
So I don't know if you've been watching the news, but Venezuela's screwed.
Yeah.
I mean, it's been screwed for a while, but it's double screwed now.
And why is that?
It's double screwed now because basically they're down to two options.
Okay.
When I say they, the people of Venezuela.
The people of Venezuela.
Which I know some people have said this, and I know they're right, is that it's hard to have too much sympathy for them because they're really a bunch of socialists, and they really want socialism. They just want a different dictator at this point because Maduro is a monster.
Right.
And he is. He's a socialist monster. But now they've come down to, would we rather have the socialist monster Maduro, or at least they perceive this as their two options, or do we want to back this other interim guy and end up going down the road of like a U.S. CIA-backed coup of their government that installs another guy. And honestly, I got to tell you, if your options are socialist dictator or neocon puppet, you got some pretty sad choices.
Yeah.
not looking the best. I don't know if you saw in the news, John Bolton, the evil warmongering mustache that is, John Bolton was in some memes and made some headlines recently because he was at a press conference and he was holding a notepad.
Uh-huh.
And in the notepad, it had some scribbling on it. But I mean, it's 2019. You know, people are going to enhance that shit, and they're going to see what it says. Oh, yeah. And it said something about 5,000 troops to Colombia. Not here, thank God, not Colombia, Tennessee. Colombia, the South American country. And, of course, that just sent social media ablaze because people were like, wait, hold on, we're sending troops to Colombia now? Like, what, is that a thing or is they already there? We don't know. And, of course, it's not a big surprise that would be on John Bolton, of all people's notepad, because he wants to station 5,000 troops every square mile because he's a neocon piece of crap, and that's what they want to do. But it's awesome that he was in the news because I have my meme of the week. We haven't had a meme of the week in a while.
There you go. Meme
so
of
we're
the week.
bringing back the meme of the week.
There it is.
The meme of the week right there. So it's John Bolton says, "Have you tried killing South American children? I haven't either. What if it's more fun than killing Middle Eastern children?"
Oh. That's rough.
I mean, it's rough, but it couldn't happen to a nicer guy. I mean, these people, I mean, they will always sell for the sake of U.S. interests.
Sure.
Untold amount of just destruction and terror on people around the world. And it's a shame that so many people in this country are not more outraged by what their government does. And I know one of the reasons why they're not is because they don't see it, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's not happening on your street corner or in your
certainly
town.
not on the news.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it's out of sight, out of mind.
Right.
Or we've talked on this program before about that default switch of, do I default trust what government's doing, or do I default not trust what government's doing? And if you default trust what government's doing, then you might think, well, if they're sending troops overseas, there must be a good reason.
Right. Yeah.
No, you should, first of all, you should never have the default position of
trust.
They might be doing something good, or the trust is good.
Right.
I have no trust for them, and there's no reason for us to get involved in Venezuela. Like, look, Maduro's awful, and all of these celebrities who were touting Maduro some years ago, saying that they've created a socialist paradise in Venezuela, like, all of those guys can eat dirt.
Yeah.
Sean Penn was one of them, Michael Moore. Some of these types of folks were talking positively about them. Of course, now their people are starving and everybody's rioting in the streets.
Yeah.
Look, that's awful. That's a terrible situation. I hate it for people there, and Maduro's a monster.
Right.
But that doesn't mean that the United States should be involved.
That's right.
That never means the United States should be involved.
Why is that our problem?
Why is that our problem? There are bad things in this world, as we've said on this program many times. As Milton Friedman would say, nirvana is not meant for this world.
That's right.
It's not going to happen. It's not possible. But in the pursuit of that, not only does it cost blood and treasure, but in the pursuit of doing it, you start more fires than you put out.
That's right.
And that's assuming you even believe they actually have that much virtuous intent, which I don't have. Yeah. I don't believe John Bolton has any virtuous intent.
Just look at his mustache.
Just look at that face. Look at that. look at what he's yelling about.
Yeah.
Like, right then, he's saying, "I want to eat that child." That's what he's saying right there. Like, look at him.
Well, why do you have a mustache like that? Just to catch the blood.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, on that dark turn, we're going to take a quick break before we cleanse our palate of this disturbing introduction. And we're back with our guest for today, the great Gene Epstein. We will be right back. Hey, did you see the playoff games last weekend?
Oh, you're into the sports ball game. Sports ball is not a libertarian sports show. It's a sports show done by a couple of libertarians.
For when you need your bread in circuses.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Gold Standard for episode 49. I'm your host, Alan Mosley, and we are joined today by an absolutely fantastic guest who you may have heard on many other programs many times. I know I've always enjoyed his appearances on the Tom Woods Show. We have Gene Epstein with us today, who's the former chief economist for the New York Stock Exchange and was an economics editor at Barron's Magazine. He currently represents the Soho Forum, which you can find at thesohoforum.org. Do I have that right, Gene? Thesohoforum.org?
You absolutely do. I was a senior economist, and you promoted me to chief, but I'm not going to complain.
Okay, well, I mean, if there's anything we do here, it's to build our guests up to make us look better, too. So there you go.
I'm a chief and not a senior, but now I am the director of the debate series, the Soho Forum, indeed, yes.
Fantastic. So, Gene, I'm going to actually start a little bit off script here. I saw a tweet from you recently where you were talking about an episode of The Sopranos. Are you a big fan of The Sopranos?
Yeah, I am. I do think that among the the great video series of all time. The Sopranos could be number one. It's certainly one of a handful of great layered series about American society. So indeed, I'm a fan. And it's the 20th anniversary of its inauguration. So I'm watching parts of it again, and I'm still pretty impressed. Yeah.
I do. I think it holds up pretty well. Not every show does. It's hard to say any one show is the best show because there's just. I mean, I think it's easier to say if you're a top 5 and then you just sort of kind of leave it at that. But I definitely.
Yeah, no, indeed. It's got a lot of flaws. It's got, in fact, like one whole season that was just okay. But, I mean, that would wreck a lesser work. But because the core of it was so great, it succeeds. And that, in a way, is very true of so many of the great novels of the 19th century, so many of the great plays. As I like to say, if Shakespeare and Dickens and Balzac were alive today, they'd be working for HBO and Showtime and Netflix, developing series, because that's where the commercial action is, just like in Shakespeare's day, plays with the action, and just like in Dickens and Balzac's day, novels with the action. So they'd be doing those shows, including The Sopranos.
Well, let me ask you this, since we're on the subject.
Okay.
What is your opinion of the finale?
Oh God!
Because you know when that was first on TV, it was just this big controversy the way it ended, and
Yeah. Well, I have a very odd opinion of the finale. But again, by the way, I often feel that when a question is asked, that sometimes some viewers are not clear what the question means. So we do have to spoil it for the viewers and say that those of us who saw the finale must have been, I guess what, because it had 8 seasons, must have been 12 years ago. So a lot of time has passed, guys. And if you haven't seen it, we're just going to spoil it for you. It looks as though there are a bunch of guys coming to this restaurant to kill Tony Soprano, but then we suddenly fade to black. And that's the end of the show, and Tony is still alive. We don't know whether he's been killed or not. I've been somewhat critical of that sort of indecisive end, but then my surprising observation is that James Gandolfini, the actor who played Tony Soprano and who was so identified with the part, died the way a gangster ignominiously dies. The poor actor at the age of 51, he drank too much and ate too much one night, and that night he was dead at the age of 51. I knew a gangster named Big Jaime. I exaggerate. My father knew the gangster Big Jaime, a Jewish gangster who was a loan shark, and he choked to death on some food at a bar mitzvah. So I associate the same thing with Tony Soprano. So I think, look, Tony is dead because James Gandolfini is dead. And indeed, the woman who played Carmela Soprano, she suggested, that's Tony's wife, she said she could make a comeback and she's going to run the Soprano family. She's offered to do so. And certainly HBO would line up the Brinks truck in order to underwrite that because it was such a successful series. But it looks like the producer, David Chase, doesn't want to do it. So Tony really is dead because the great James Gandolfini is dead. So that's my answer. But it was unsatisfactory. I think it was a bit of a cop-out. We should have had a more decisive end. If he's not going to die, then let's not fade to black. Let's just show that he survives that evening and he continues on. Or if he does die, let's show that as well. So that's my answer. But again, Tony is dead because James Gandolfini is dead.
Now, that's interesting. Now, I'm going to tell you what my interpretation is, because I remember when I first saw the ending of the show, I kind of had a same opinion of you of that. You know, I understand they're trying to do something artistic, but it just wasn't satisfying. And after such a long and successful series, you can't help but want a satisfying conclusion to all of that material. The argument I would make is that just from maybe an episode or two before, they make mention in one of the episodes that if you're whacked, if death comes to you that way, then it's not some long drawn out emotional experience. It's just, if someone were to shoot you in the back of the head, the lights go out and that's it. It's just over. There's no big rigmarole. And so you see you already see where I'm going with this. Is that that scene
Tony's head.
Scene is being shot from Tony's perspective, and that's why you see him looking around. And when it fades to black, that's because he just got shot.
Well, I like that. I think that has a certain poetry to it, absolutely. And now, obviously, David Chase is not letting on either way. And in a way, of course, my answer sort of underscores yours, which is that Tony died, so did James Gandolfini shortly thereafter, choking to death on food and wine. So you're absolutely right. And I just want to draw a parallel. One of the greatest novels ever written, Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. As many people know, it had one ending in the original version. He doesn't get the girl, and then Dickens wrote another ending for the book version that he does get the girl. And in a way, both endings are a little bit ambiguous, a little bit unsatisfying. Doesn't detract from the fact that that the novel is one of the greatest novels ever written, and the debate and discomfort with the ending of The Sopranos doesn't detract from the greatness. But I think what you've said is very insightful. I appreciate it, and has a lot of validity, and probably will color my feelings when I'm watching that final episode, which I may be doing in a couple of months.
Well, there you go. I'm glad everyone can tune into this episode to get their in-depth Sopranos breakdown.
Yeah. We spoiled it for you guys, but there's no real spoilers with The Sopranos. If you really love something, if it's truly great, then seeing it a second and third time only deepens your appreciation in the same way that listening to Beethoven's Ninth Symphony deepens your appreciation every time you listen to it over again. That's what's true of great novels and great television series.
Now that is a perfect point. I know, because I do enjoy the series Game of Thrones, which is also produced by HBO. And you hear people talking all the time about all of this, the layers of foreshadowing that are in Game of Thrones, which is true. But it seems to me that if you're not going to re-enjoy a tale more than once, then that's sort of lost on you, isn't it? Yeah, indeed. Absolutely. I mean, I will say about Game of Thrones, where my limitations lie, as I like to say to all the young people, including many of my young relatives who love that show, and I say that slightly weepy, I form attachments to people, guys. And when that episode happened, I forget which part of the season, when like 2/3 of the people you really care about are killed inside of about 7 minutes, I decided this is just too much for me. But of course, I respect people who can go with it. Almost nobody is safe in this drama. People you care about could just be gone in a minute. And so it really takes a strong constitution to be able to watch that show. And unfortunately, I don't seem to have it. So I've fallen short. But I may reconsider. Who knows? Well, I like to think you have to have a strong constitution to watch this show as well.
Oh, people you really care about get killed on your show. Okay, just like on.
Well, they don't literally die. They only figuratively die when they come on and we have terrible shows.
I gotta turn the lights on again. Go ahead. Yeah.
So Gene, now that we've had our HBO recap. I wanted to talk a little bit to you. You recently had an awesome debate, and the gentleman's name is vanished from my brain, so you have to remind me.
Bhaskar Sankara.
Yeah.
You mean Bhaskar Sankara, an Indian guy, very articulate, of Indian descent, quite Americanized, loves basketball. Yeah, but go ahead. Yeah.
And so I decided this would kind of be, because we've discussed free market enterprise and capitalism and socialism on this program many times, but I wanted this episode to be our socialism extravaganza because we have the great Gene Epstein on.
Sure.
So I'm gonna throw you a few kind of cheapy softballs, and I want to see what your answers are.
Okay.
So in a 1 or 2 or 3 minute answer, really quickly. So why does socialism fail?
Well, conventional socialism fails with anybody who cares about freedom, because freedom is impossible under conventional socialism, where some community or government monopolizes the means of production. It is impossible to have freedom under those circumstances, because any kind of freedom like your freedom to operate your show would be severely under pressure from conventional socialism, because the government or this monopolistic community would be controlling the means of production, and the means of production includes the studio that you're sitting in. So really, if you want to give me that amount of time, I could say that's the end of it. Because if you care about the freedom of the individual, you cannot abide the idea that the means of production are monopolized by anybody. They have to be up for grabs because the exercise of freedom requires free access to the means of production. So notice I have not said anything about the economics of socialism, which is also a bust. My point is that we can kill the idea purely conventional socialism based upon the fact that it makes freedom impossible.
So for the next one, with that answer in mind, then whether it's a Bernie Sanders or whether it's the flavor of the day, the Congresswoman from New York, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, why then do these ideas seem to reappear almost in cycles?
Well, that question is I'm going to flounder that one because that why, as I've explained, I think I actually explained when I debated Vasco Sankara. I come from, my mother was a communist with a capital C. If you wanted to keep the Jews out in 1910, you would have had a good excuse because most of them are going to be left wing, and most of them were. Many of them were communists, and so I understand the romance and the appeal of communism. I think it's a socialism as well. It's a kind of a childlike return to the idea that we can be a family and that family values can be translated into the realm of the state and of society. And that's the best I can say about it, that everybody wants to be our brother and that we're going to love everybody, that there will be no transactions that will be impersonal. And we don't realize, of course, that when we translate the family into the realm of the larger society via the state, we don't realize that we're abrogating freedom. But those values and sticking to the high concept of the family values imposed on society, I guess, is perennially appealing to naive people who are stunted in their intellects and stunted in their emotional growth.
So what is it then about capitalism that, I'm not sure how to word this, what is it about capitalism that makes it an easy target for the Elizabeth Warrens and the Bernie Sanders of the world to attack in the media or on Twitter or whatever?
Well, yes, the reason it's an easy target is because it basically requires you to put your mind around an idea that a child has difficulty grasping. If you have a childlike or stunted intellect, the idea that when no one's in charge, the free interaction of human beings and human institutions promotes freedom in terms of the best outcome and promotes and reflects human wants in terms of the best outcome. The complicated idea that in a division of labor society, even that idea is complicated. The idea that it's better for us to divide up the labor and specialize, that, as Adam Smith wrote, that's what creates wealth. But then in the division of labor society, allowing prices and profits to allocate resources, that's a somewhat complicated idea because we tend to think, well, we need to have a policy over energy. We need to have a policy over food. We need to have a policy for the poor. All of those ideas that somebody should be in charge of society, a little bit difficult for stunted intellects to grasp. That's why it's a somewhat hard sell, of course, especially, of course, for power-hungry politicians like Bernie Sanders and I dare say possibly like Ocasio-Cortez. It gets in their way because they want to be in charge. They want access to money and power, and the market will not give it to them. It will only give them some power if they can sell the product that people want to buy, and they're clueless about those things. So that's why I think capitalism requires a somewhat more subtle understanding of the way society works than socialism requires, and therein lies its vulnerability to the arguments of the stunted intellects like Bernie Sanders.
So something that I've seen more and more recently, and I think you hear this a lot from the celebrity left, your Jim Carreys, your Michael Moores, your Sean Penns of the world. A lot of those folks will say that people should just embrace socialism because it's inevitable, that the inevitable conclusion of down the road is that the state's going to grow, we're going to move towards socialism. They would argue that there's an inevitability that that's the outcome that we will ultimately reach. What do you say to that? I mean, is there any truth to that, or do you think that's nonsense?
I would say that to call any prediction about the future or about the trends of the future nonsense, I guess, is clearly flirting with arrogance. None of us can predict the future. The only thing I can point to, however, is that economic freedom, as measured, for example, by the Fraser Institute's Economic Freedom Index, or the Doing Business Index, as measured by the World Bank. Those are indexes of the extent to which we have capitalism in the world, and the trends are all in our direction and not in theirs. Even the U.S., by the way, which peaked in terms of its economic freedom in the year 2000 and lost ground, has gained some ground recently and is still high. But for the world, for the globe, if you include China, the market liberalization of China in the late 70s, and to some degree in India, as well as other regions of the world, the World Economic Freedom Index is at an all-time high. So therefore, the trends are in our direction and not in theirs. And I do, of course, now I'm going to be faith-based because I'm going to predict the future. I do think that over the centuries as well, and as well as, of course, the limited period of the last 30, 40 years, the craving for freedom and the understanding about how capitalism not only promotes freedom, but promotes prosperity for the masses, that is something that we're all become more and more aware of as time goes on. Now, with that said, I'm not necessarily predicting that the socialists won't be in control in a couple of years. I'm just saying that in the broad sweep of history, the history is on our side and not on their side.
Now, that's interesting that you brought up the Scandinavian countries. We had the great Walter Block just last week, and he had made the similar point that the Bernie Sanderses of the world like to say, I love those countries because they're socialist, whereas Walter Block would say, I love those countries because they're capitalist. Yes. And that there's the total disconnect in what people understand.
Well, yes, and of course, I mean, Sweden is a good example of a country that became more socialist in the 80s, early 90s, and then recovered and bounced back. And certainly, again, I would put it simply, I would ask a socialist, don't you hate the stock market? Those grimy people who trade equities and all those booms and busts of those greedy types on Wall Street? Well, did you know that all of these Scandinavian countries have stock markets? And you're calling them socialist? My God, you're abrogating your values to do that. They all have stock markets. And so that alone should teach these people that we're not talking about socialist economies. We're talking about fundamentally capitalist economies with large welfare states.
So if we were going to give some of our audience at home some good talking points or some fodder to use in their conversations, what is a response you give to people that always fall back on every socialist experiment that didn't work out well, they reply with, well, that wasn't real socialism. You hear that a lot. Yeah. That, well, Venezuela's not real socialism, so we don't count that against us. We don't tally that on the scoreboard of socialist successes or failures. What is your answer to people who use that line?
Well, okay. Bear in mind that I'm going to take a couple of more minutes than you're usually allowing me to answer.
No. You can take all the time you want.
Fair enough. Okay. My point is that the reason why I asked to answer your first question about conventional socialism by talking about how freedom is by definition impossible under conventional socialism. And by the way, I'll get later to why I keep using the adjective conventional socialism. That is monopolistic control of the means of production. Is that it makes freedom impossible. That's just a logical problem, and therefore we don't even have to look at the empirical data to recognize that socialism has to fail in the key respect that it makes the full exercise of classical liberal freedom impossible. And if anybody believes in the freedom of the individual, as for example Bhaskar Sankara, my socialist opponent, it really is a believer in freedom. Mm-hmm. On that ground alone, you have to abandon socialism, and there's no reason to even look at the horrors of of socialism in practice, because even if it wasn't quite as horrific as it turned out to be, it abrogates freedom. It makes it impossible. Would make it. What government is going to allow you to operate your podcast? You're going to have to apply to the government-run bank for funds in order to rent your studio. Who's going to allow that? Who would allow my social forum? So that's obviously impossible. But getting more specifically to your question, I guess you'd ask them this: if socialism has had about 100 years of a try, we've had about 100 years of socialism. Can you point to a single example of any kind of success that you would claim for socialism, especially since we've already established that the Scandinavian countries, a lot more could be said about them, by the way, but we've established the Scandinavian countries are not an example of socialism. We can counter with a couple of controlled experiments. History rarely offers you a controlled experiment. By that I mean, for example, North Korea versus South Korea, West Germany versus East Germany, cases in which you take the same country. You and I are in charge of an experiment. We say, Germans, we're running an experiment, and you guys are our guinea pigs. We're going to divide up the country, and we're going to turn the east part of the country into a fundamentally socialist government control, the means production. The west part of Germany is going to be mainly capitalist. It's going to be mostly promote private ownership of the means of production, and we're going to wait a few decades, and we're going to see what happens. Now, of course, the Germans would rebel against becoming guinea pigs, but history handed that controlled experiment to us on a silver platter. We had East Germany versus West Germany, and we had a stark difference between the two until the reunification occurred in the 90s. And then, of course, West Germany generously bought out East Germany and absorbed it. Another example, of course, that tragically persists to this day is North Korea versus South Korea. North Korea fundamentally socialist, South Korea mainly capitalist. Look at the stark differences between the two. So those two examples alone should convince you. We have before and after tests. We have the market liberalization in China in 1978. Deng Xiaoping, the major slogan at that time, to be rich is glorious. That was the title of a book about China. To be rich is glorious. Go for it. Have private ownership of land. Start your own businesses. All that started in the late 1970s. That was when China began to lift itself out of poverty. So we have overwhelming empirical examples of the failure of socialism and the relative success of capitalism, and nothing ultimately is going to convince them of the impossibility of socialism. You and I could get into the economics of it, the difficulties of planning, the basic irrationality of planning under socialism. That's a somewhat longer story. That's something I learned as an economist, but in a way, none of it is really necessary, because if you're not a lover of freedom, and most Americans are, most Europeans, I hope, are. Even Bernie Sanders and Ocasio-Cortez certainly care about freedom, much as their stunted intellect gets in the way. But even if you're not a lover of freedom, it's probably hopeless anyway. Then you'll just take joy in running an authoritarian society, as of course so many people do in this society. So many intellectuals, so many politicians. They want to be in charge. They want to succumb to the three most powerful drugs American society or any society has to offer: sex, money, and power. That's what they want, and that's why they want to run society. But if you love freedom, then it's a closed book. There's no way for conventional socialism to work in terms of your values. And look at the empirical record of how awfully it's failed in terms of actually delivering bread to the masses. That's where people starve. That's where the masses starve, when the government controls the farms. And of course, just one final digression. It's amazing to me how often you hear from socialists about how, well, if a worker works for a capitalist, he has his choice between working for the capitalist or starving. Or under capitalism, the capitalists don't care if you starve. I mean, they should talk. Starvation has more or less defined the socialist experiment. That's been been the most egregious aspect of the socialist experiment in China, in particular, the famine of the 1950s. And by the way, the famine that would have happened in the Soviet Union in the 1970s had the U.S. not come to the rescue of the Soviet Union and given them our food, which is a fascinating story in itself. I think I've gone way beyond my usual few minutes, so I'll shut up right now and wait for your next question.
No, that's perfect. So for everybody at home that's listening, you know now the difference between capitalism and socialism is that in capitalism you either work or you starve, and in socialism you work and starve anyway. So there you go. Now you know the difference.
That's a good line. You're working. Yeah, I know. If you follow my tweets, I was quoting a guy I greatly respect, Noam Chomsky, who said, that you have just one employer to choose from. It was basically what he said. And if you don't work for this employer on his terms, then your choice is starving. And that's a very, Chomsky goes, that's a very wrong. That's not exactly a free choice. He was trying to rebut Walter Block. So I wrote a little tweet and said, according to Bureau of Labor Statistics numbers, over the past 12 months, 40 million workers have voluntarily quit their jobs. They've told their employer, take this job and shove it. So we ought to look for the next part of it. I guess we've had 40 million people starving over the past year. They all starved to death because they quit their single employers whom they didn't like. So that is presumably the logic of Chomsky's argument. And of course that gets into the subtleties of the way the labor markets work, where, again, it requires a little bit of an understanding about how workers have a choice and how wages get bid up because employers are bidding for workers, and just as they are bidding for things in any other marketplace.
Before we run out of time, I want you to take a moment to tell everybody. I can't imagine anyone listening doesn't know what the Soho Forum is. But on the crazy chance that they don't, I want you to tell everybody what's coming up next at the Soho Forum.
I want to tell you that, but if that's going to be the final question, I just want to volunteer one thing.
Okay.
The one point I made, that's why I've been using all along the term conventional socialism. I've said that, look, if you want to run some firms according to socialist values, everybody gets paid the same. Every time you make a decision, you take it to a vote, or what have you, knock yourself out. Capitalism makes that possible for you. There have been communal experiments under capitalism. There are lots of people who live their own way. The Amish, there's certain things they don't want to buy. They run it according to their own lights. Capitalism offers you the freedom to operate socialism. It offers you the financial firepower to do so. The numbers I cite, which surprise certain people, 1/3 of all consumption is accounted for by the lower half of the population, nearly 2/3 by the bottom 4/5. You have consumer firepower that can organize and only buy from socialist firms. Over $3 trillion is controlled by union pension funds, more than 40 trillion worldwide. You have financial firepower of all kinds to form a socialist sub-economy according to your lights. You can do it your way under capitalism. And that's why I wanted Bhaskar to go for it. And I mean that most sincerely. Look, if somebody had a successful commune around the corner and everybody's happy doing it, they all get paid the same. And I have my doubts about such an experiment. But if you can do it, wonderful. And if you do it that way, you won't abrogate my right to work in whatever way I want to work. And so that's the major way in which we can call their bluff. Form the Socialist Society tomorrow, quit writing books about it, and quit arguing that we have to impose socialism through government's iron fist. You don't have to go that route. That's a horrible way to go. It will destroy freedom. Form your kibbutz. Do what you want. Knock yourself out. Getting back to the Soho Forum, since apparently you want to conclude this show and get me to shut up. The Soho Forum is a debate series that I run that runs once a month in downtown Manhattan. It's mainly of interest to libertarians. On February 20th, we're going to have a debate between John Allison, who's a banker, very much a free market guy who ran a major bank quite successfully and has written about this, who's going to be arguing about the causes of the financial meltdown of 2008 with Mark Zandi. We have a whole roster of events, and we found that the dramatic confrontation of a one-on-one debate with Oxford-style voting. Oxford-style voting is before and after voting, where you vote vote for or against or undecided on the resolution before the debate begins, and then you vote after the debate ends. And whoever moves the needle in his or her favor wins the debate. That causes audience participation, a certain amount of drama. The one-on-one conflict, I think, adds theatricality to the occasion. We found we were getting so many people wanting to show up, we started to charge for admission. It's still cheaper than the price of a movie for students. That's $12 for students, $24 general admission. We also go. We're also filmed and recorded by Reason TV on YouTube and on podcast. And our Bitcoin debate has had over 400,000 views.
Wow.
My socialism debate has had nearly 40,000 views on YouTube. And so I'm quite pleased by the success of the Soul Forum, and I hope you can come. I hereby offer you a comp ticket next time you're in New York City.
I would love
a $24 value.
I would love to do that. Can I get a free Coke if I mention Tom Woods?
Oh my God, you let that out too. Yes, indeed. say that. Tom is a great guy. I've been on his show a lot. I admire him. And his daughter, Tom showed up with his daughter a few months ago, and his daughter said the name Tom Woods to me, and she got a free drink at the bar. Say the name Tom Woods to me, and you got a free drink at the bar, which is another part of the evening we offer, because it's got a twofold mission, and it's physical space. We want people to come together and see the clash of ideas, but we also want to have a party. My wife actually caters the delicious food, which is free, and then there's a wine bar, a cash bar that serves white or red wine, as well as, of course, soft drinks, and you get a free drink at the bar if you say the name Tom Woods. So it's an intellectual fest, and it's a party fest. And so please come to my Soul Forum. It's got a capacity of 200 at the Subculture Theater on Bleecker Street in downtown Manhattan, a nice, funky place, which is only about actually 2 blocks downtown from where I live with my wife in her loft on Great Jones Street. So it's an ideal life for me. I'm having a ball running the Soul Forum.
That sounds fantastic. Everybody can find more information of that at thesohoforum.org. Gene, you are welcome to come back on the show anytime and talk for as long as you want. We've enjoyed the episode, but I have one more for it. We're going to get you out the door on this one. Is a hot dog a sandwich?
Yeah, that's the toughest. You told me it was going to be softball questions all day, and it's been softball questions up to now. Now you finally give me a hardball question, which I can't deal with. But the one thing I do know is that on the Contra cruise, which I call the Soul Forum goes to the seas. Tom Woods and Bob Murphy are running that Contra cruise to Alaska in July. I'm going to be moderating a debate between them, and the debate topic has not been divulged as yet. The accusation has been that will be the debate topic. Probably, if it were the debate topic, you'd say, "I got to be there. I got to see who's right about whether hot dog is a sandwich or not." But it turns out they're going to debate something a little bit more substantial than that. Can I duck that question and hand it back to you? Could you tell me the answer to that question? Because it's been baffling me for years.
Okay, just because you're my friend, I'll do that for you. Because I tell most of our guests, I'm going to make you answer, and I'm not going to help you out. But I'll help you. Now
we have mercy on an old guy. Yeah.
Now we've had Tom Woods and Bob Murphy both on this show, and they have been asked that question. So I would submit that it actually would be an excellent debate because Tom does not agree with me. When Tom was on this show, he said, and I'm quoting him roughly verbatim, that all of his daughters believe that it is a sandwich, and to which I said to him, he must be an excellent father because they are correct. A hot dog is a sandwich. And then he rebuked me on my own program. He said, no, you and my daughters are all very wrong. It's not a sandwich. And then he went into some long ranting diatribe about how no one goes to a hot dog vendor and says, I want a hot dog sandwich. So he and I are estranged now because of our disagreement on that. But I will tell you,
show, and you can't put up. You're not going to have that guy on again.
No, sure. Never again. But it is as I borrow this from our friend Al Gore. I say it's a hashtag, an inconvenient truth. A hot dog is in fact a sandwich.
Okay, I'm glad I got the answer to that. and thanks for your insight about Tony Soprano. I think that was good.
We've appreciated it very much. Hold on just a second, Gene. Guys, we'll be right back after this break.
Have you ever been talking politics with a friend and told, if you don't like it here, you should just move to Somalia?
Well, ladies and gentlemen, from the sandy beaches of Mogadishu, Sherry and I bring you Postcards from Somalia, one of the newer products of Little L Productions, where we take on all of the fallacies of the people who say, if you don't like it, you can just get out. So we've completed what we call a double. Mm-hmm. Even though these shows come out once a week, that doesn't mean that we actually film them once a week.
No, of course not.
Maybe we film 3. Maybe we film... Actually, no. I was going to say... No, we don't ever do more than... Because that's
just too much.
It's too much.
Yeah, because then I got to edit all that, and I don't have time.
But we've now had Walter Block and Gene Epstein back to back.
That's right.
Those are some hard-hitting...
Those were some good guys.
Episodes of the Gold Standard.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
So what did you learn today from Gene?
Wow, socialism just doesn't work. You can't have freedom with socialism.
It is incompatible with freedom.
Incompatible with freedom.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I'm sure there's a lot more to it than the time that we had for, but that was a pretty straightforward answer. I mean, just pay attention.
We didn't share any clips or anything from Gene's recent debate about socialism, but it was a very interesting tactic that he used that most people will naturally tend towards the economic arguments of socialism versus capitalism. But he actually, for the most part, avoided the economic argument completely and looking at more like the moral and ethical debate of freedom not being compatible with socialism, and therefore, if you care about freedom at all, then it's a non-starter.
Right, and you can't have economic freedom without freedom, so the whole thing collapses.
Yeah, kind of like the show. The whole thing just collapses.
Yeah, kind of like when Tony Soprano took the bullet to the head.
Yeah.
Or did he?
No, okay. No, so in the scene, I wish we could show this, but then we'll get like a copyright strike or something. Yeah. In the scene, like you see Tony looking around the room because he's noticing people walking in.
From what perspective? Is it the third camera floating point, or you're looking at from inside his own eyes?
It's making a point to show Tony. Like it's making a point.
So you see Tony sitting there, and he's looking around all nervous,
It's third person, but it's making a point to show you that Tony is doing what Tony normally does, which is being aware of his surroundings because he's a paranoid mob boss.
Right.
And the way the show actually ends, because everybody remembers the cut to black, but if you rewatch the scene and you look at a couple of very specific things, you see a guy or two. There's one guy they talk about. There's a guy wearing like a brown jacket or something that you see a guy walk in that Tony notices. He notices the guy.
Yeah.
And then in the background, you see the guy like go around to the back of the restaurant, like he's going to the bathroom or something.
Yeah.
But then they're waiting on their kids to come in. They're waiting on his son, Junior, and Meadow Soprano's coming in, who she was hot.
Yeah.
But anyway, Meadow Soprano's coming in. And so he's watching for the kids. And so his focus is this way.
Yeah.
And they also, another point to add to my theory is, in earlier episodes, they demonstrate that whenever there's a loud sound or a bell or a pop, Tony jumps.
Yeah.
Like he's just naturally watching.
Yeah.
But in this episode, there's like the ringing of the door. And every time the bell, like the diner opens its door and a bell rings, every time the bell rings, he looks up at the door. Like every single time you see Tony look up at the door because he's watching for his kids coming in. When the show ends, the exact moment it ends, there's a ringing of the door. He's looking up at the door, and then it cuts to black. It's because the dude over here shoots him in the head.
Yep.
And they had also set the precedent in an earlier episode that when you get whacked like that, you don't feel it.
No.
It's just silence. It's just over.
Yeah.
And so the show, because the show was really about Tony. There's a lot of characters, but it's really about Tony. The show begins with Tony. He's the main guy, and it ends with Tony.
Yeah.
So doesn't that not make sense?
It makes total sense.
So I understand why people were unsatisfied with the ending, but to me it's actually crystal clear. And ever since I read that information, to me it's like, of course, that's how Tony Soprano's dead. That's the end of The Sopranos. Like, I get it.
Yep.
So I actually think that, in hindsight, I actually think the ending was really good.
Want to know the truth?
What?
I never saw it.
I can't even talk to you. I can't even. You know, I was actually going to make a smart alecky comment earlier in the show.
Okay.
Gene was talking about how, you know, if you want to have your socialist commune where everybody gets paid the same, you can. I was going to say to him, well, actually, everyone gets paid the same on the gold standard too, which is nothing.
Nothing.
Yeah, so
Absolutely,
we all get
positively
paid the same.
nothing. Yeah.
So if you want to support what we do, you need to like and share our content, and you can find us on Facebook.com/TGS Alan Mosley. Twitter's at Alan M. Mosley.
Yep.
You don't have to do any of that. You just go to our website, which is thegoldstandarpodcast.com, and there's a little donate button on there, and you click on that, and then it pulls up like a little PayPal thing, and you put in like 10000, you know, however many zeros you're feeling. I'm feeling like 7 or 8 zeros, however many zeros you're thinking, and then you put in your information, and then you send us the money.
We can't stress enough the like and share.
Thank you so much for supporting the program, guys, and we will see you next week.